There's very little appetite for a ceasefire. They think that any ceasefire would allow Hamas to regroup, perhaps get weapons or organise the logistics for getting extra weapons and extra resources.
Well, Arab leaders are also lobbying US Secretary of State Antony Blinken to press Israel for a ceasefire. Let's speak to Alistair Dawber, the Times Washington correspondent, who's in Tel Aviv in Israel. Morning, Alistair. You have the Arab countries demanding this immediate ceasefire, the US saying that it's worried that will allow Hamas time to regroup. Just give us more detail on what both sides are saying.
Well, and the Israelis are obviously the third part of that equation, and they're saying absolutely not. They're demanding that the hostages being held in Gaza are released before there's any countenance of a ceasefire. But Antony Blinken, as you suggested, he was in Israel for the third time since the October 7th attacks yesterday. He was in Amman yesterday. He's off to Turkey today. There's some suggestion he may even come back to Israel today. There's a logjam. The Arab countries point to the fact that now almost 9,500 people have been killed in Gaza since the start of the war. I mean, it must be said that those are Hamas figures; those can't be independently verified. The US is also talking about a humanitarian pause to allow some aid and some help to some of the stricken civilians in Gaza. But there is an impasse. There's certainly no doubt. I mean, what the Americans won't say is that there should be a ceasefire from the fighting, from the aerial attacks, because Hamas is still a force, and Israel, given the US absolutely supports Israel's right to defend itself, will say that Israel has a right to try and dismantle Hamas. Mm.
There is, of course, figures which are coming out from the US envoy, David Satterfield, who said that there are between 350,000 and 400,000 people still in northern Gaza. We know that Israel is saying to those people, you need to get out of that area because of the bombardment there. And interestingly, the main road is opening in Gaza later out of Gaza City to let people out for 3 hours. Mm-hmm. This is one of the really difficult things, isn't it, for people who won't leave or can't leave, and that bombardment continues. This is morally a really difficult situation.
It's an extremely difficult situation, and not only the bombing continues, it's reported now that Israeli ground forces are effectively encircling Gaza City. Any pretense that these are sort of calculated incursions by the Israeli military, I think can now be put aside. I think this is a full ground invasion into Gaza. They're surrounding the city. You're right. The Americans reckon that there's about 350 to 400,000 people. Some of them can move, some of them can't. Israel would argue that some of these people are also combatants as well, and that they'll be fighting these people. Gaza is a very densely populated place. There's anywhere up to about 1.5 million, 2 million people crammed in there. It's difficult for some people to move. The south of Gaza is also being hit. I mean, it's not that is free of airstrikes and military activity. So from a civilian situation, it's extremely difficult. There's also a paucity of aid getting in the hospitals. Again, it must be said that the Gaza Health Ministry is controlled by Hamas, but hospitals say that they're running out of fuel. In some cases, they're carrying out operations by torchlight, and there's very little anaesthetic. So the civilian situation, is undoubtedly desperate. You mentioned in the segment there from Amal that the Rafah crossing was closed yesterday. While people are leaving, foreigners are leaving Gaza, and some of the injured are leaving Gaza as well. That crossing also allows aid in, and if it's crossed going out of Gaza, it's also closed going out of Gaza. It's also closed going in, and that's the problem for the civilian population as well. Mm-hmm.
You were mentioning about Israel's very strong line that there will be no ceasefire, no pause until all of those 242 Israeli hostages are released. The Times has been reporting that officials close to the negotiations being really brokered by Qatar have said that Hamas had asked for a 5-day humanitarian pause in exchange for releasing all of the civilian hostages. And I guess the important bit in that line is civilians. Is there any sense of, are these negotiations still going on behind the scenes? I mean, presumably they are. Do we know if any progress is being made?
Well, the Qataris are very important because they are one of the few countries to have relations with the Israelis, but also with Hamas and of course with the Americans as well. I was at a rally last night in Tel Aviv for some of the hostages. Some of the families of the hostages were there, and the point of the rally was, the Israeli government has to secure the hostages' release. I didn't speak to a single person last night who was calling for a ceasefire. These people are not gung ho. They're not sort of craving war, but also they know that Israel, or they say that Israel shouldn't essentially order a ceasefire and continue, but they want the hostages out. It's interesting the point about the soldiers that are hostages as well. The number of about 230 to 245 hostages, a number of them are soldiers. I think that any deal that might be done in the future, and I don't think we're close to one now, would include every Israeli that's currently being held in Gaza.
I'm interested in your conversations with the families last night of the Israeli hostages. You said that they don't want a ceasefire. Do they feel that the ground operation in Gaza is the most effective way of releasing the hostages, or do they see as diplomacy as being the best route to getting their loved ones home?
I don't think they would go. They would venture that argument. I don't think they would say that they're military strategists or believe that the best way of achieving various goals is either military or through diplomacy. These are just people that are very desperate to get their family members back. At the same time, people think back to what happened in Israel 4 weeks ago when the Hamas attack took place. And I think there's very little appetite for a ceasefire. I think that any ceasefire would allow Hamas to regroup, perhaps get weapons or organise the logistics for getting extra weapons and extra resources. So I think there's an appetite for Hamas, not civilians in Gaza. There's a great deal of sympathy for civilians in Gaza, but Hamas should be continued to be hit very, very hard. They just want the Israeli government to get their hostages out. It's an extraordinarily difficult equation.
Mm. Now, we mentioned that the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is heading to Turkey today. Talk to us about the significance of those meetings and what is likely to be achieved.
Well, Turkey's held, is a partner of Israel. They've had fractious relations in the past, and I think it's Blinken just going to every major country in the Middle East to try and find some sort of breakthrough, find some sort of influence. The Americans are very concerned about the humanitarian situation. They are calling very, very hard for more aid to get into Gaza, more food, more medicine, water supplies in some cases are running low. So I think Blinken's job is just to fly around the region, talk to as many leaders as he possibly can and find solutions. Whether we'll have a breakthrough or not, I don't know. I mean, he had a pretty hard time in Oman yesterday. A lot of the Arab leaders he met there were demanding that US uses its influence, as we've said, to get to a ceasefire. But I don't think the Americans are really in the mood to sort of try and persuade the Israelis to stop fighting.